rock is flat and wide, the kind of Canadian shield granite that has been sitting there since before anything alive was walking on it. It's late morning, and the man crouching near the tree line has a sketch pad on his knee and a pencil moving fast. He's not sketching wildlife or landscape. He's sketching a craft the size of a house, sitting on a rock about 160 feet in front of him, and it's humming. He's been watching it for a half an hour. He is a trained observer, a World War II veteran, a man who spent years in military intelligence, and right now, he is squinting at this thing and thinking, American. Has to be American. He has seen experimental military hardware before. He knows the Cold War produces strange machines. Somebody in that thing is having a very bad day, and maybe he can help. So he walks towards it. He cups his hands around his mouth and shouts into the hum of it. Okay, Yankee boys, having trouble? Come on out and we'll see what we can do about it. Nobody answers. This is still unexplained. Brief explorations of unsolved mysteries. My name is Mark. Stefan Michalak was 51 years old in the spring of 1967, and he was exactly the kind of man you would want as a witness to something strange. He had come to Canada from Poland after the war, built a life as an industrial mechanic in Winnipeg, and somewhere along the way picked up a serious hobby in amateur geology. He had a prospector's permit and a working knowledge of rock formations. And on weekends, when the weather allowed, he would head out into the Whiteshell Provincial Park in Manitoba to look for quartz veins. Whiteshell sits in the Canadian Shield, that ancient exposed bedrock that forms the geological spine of central Canada. It's not a gentle place. The terrain is rugged and uneven. The lakes are cold, even in the summer. The trees are dense enough to swallow sound, and the black flies in the warmer months are absolutely merciless. Falcon Lake itself is one of the park's larger bodies of water, a recreational spot close enough to Winnipeg for weekend trips, but wild enough that once you're a few hundred yards off the beaten path, you are generally alone out there. On May 20th, 1967, Stefan Michalak was very much alone. He had been out prospecting since the morning, working a marshy area near the lake, when around 12:15 in the afternoon the geese started making noise, that frantic, agitated sound that means something has disrupted them. He looked up. Two cigar-shaped objects, glowing red, were descending at an angle. As they got closer, they shifted shape, or at least appeared to, becoming oval, and then disc-like. One of them stopped, hovered for a moment, then moved off to the west, fading from red to orange to gray as it went. The other one kept descending until it settled onto a flat expanse of exposed rock, roughly 160 feet from where Michalak was standing. He did not run. He watched. Over the next half hour, the craft sat there and Michalak sat with it, sketching. The object was saucer-shaped. He would later say somewhere between 35 and 40 feet across and 10 to 15 feet thick, with a dome or a cupola on top. It had shifted in appearance from that initial red glow to something like hot stainless steel with a golden haze around it. There was a smell he described as sulfur, a sound like a whirling electric motor, a hiss of air being expelled somewhere along its surface. Then a door opened. He could see the light inside, not steady light, flashing beams and panels that reminded him, in his own words, of a computer. And he heard voices, two of them, one higher in pitch than the other, human-sounding voices, though he could not make out the words. That is when he walked over and shouted his greeting, the Yankee Boys line, which I find genuinely funny and also completely understandable given who he was and what he had been trained to assume about unusual aircraft. When they didn't answer in English, he tried Russian, then German, then Italian, then French, then Ukrainian. Stefan Michalak spoke 6 languages and used all 6 of them and got nothing back. The voices had gone quiet. After a while, he walked closer and touched the surface of the craft with his gloved hand. hot enough to melt the fingertips of a leather glove. He stepped back. The craft began to rotate. As it turned, a grid-pattern exhaust vent, roughly 9 inches high by 6 inches wide, swung around until it was directly facing his chest. Then it fired. A blast of hot gas shot through the vent holes and hit him. His shirt and undershirt ignited. He ripped them off. The craft was already rising, the turbulence from its departure knocking him backwards. By the time Michalak made his way back to civilization, he was vomiting, dizzy, and burned. The pattern of burns on his upper abdomen matched the grid holes in the exhaust vent. A checkerboard of first-degree burns on his skin, corroborated by the matching grid of holes melted onto his undershirt. And it was only going to get stranger from there. Within a week, Michalak had lost 22 pounds, going from 180 pounds to 158 pounds. His lymphocyte count, a key immune marker, dropped from a healthy 25% to a near-lethal 16%. He was having blackout spells where his vision simply dimmed until he lost consciousness. His skin was emitting a smell his family described as burning electrical circuits mixed with sulfur. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigated. The Royal Canadian Air Force investigated. The Department of National Defense investigated. The Department of Health and Welfare came in to assess radiation risk. The American Condon Committee, which was the U.S. Air Force's major UFO study effort, took a look. The White Shell Nuclear Research Establishment sent people. The Manitoba Cancer Institute assessed the biological effects. That is an extraordinary mobilization for a story that could have been dismissed. At the landing site, investigators found a 15-foot semicircle of exposed rock, where all of the moss and vegetation had been removed, as if swept clean. Soil samples from the site tested positive for radioactivity, attributed to radium-226, at a level of 3 microcuries. The Department of National Defense formally classified the case as unsolved. An internal letter to Michalak stated that neither the D&D nor the RCMP had been able to find evidence that would dispute his account. In 1968, while exploring that site again, Michalak found 2 W-shaped silver bars that had been melted into a rock fissure within the landing zone. Chemical analysis found them to be 93 to 96% pure silver. They are coated in a layer of quartz sand and showed traces of radioactivity in a loose outer layer that could be washed off. Also in 1968, Michalak's burns returned, just appeared again on his abdomen, in the same grid pattern. Photographs from January that year show evenly spaced uniform marks, distinct from the more irregular lesions his physician described in the immediate aftermath of May 1967. That distinction matters, and I'll come back to it. The Michalak home, meanwhile, had become something close to a circus. Journalists camped outside. True believers showed up wanting to talk about their own experiences. The family was rattled and exhausted. His son Stan, years later, summed up the situation with the kind of bluntness you only get from someone who lived through it. Quote, "If Dad hoaxed this," Stan said, "remember, we're talking about a blue-collar industrial mechanic. If he hoaxed it, then he was a freaking genius." Unquote. That quote has stuck with me, because he's right. The complexity of what would have been required to fake this, and the complete absence of any payoff for doing so, are real considerations. So here is where it splits. The first possibility is the one that requires the least imagination, and also the one that keeps running into walls. The hoax theory holds that Michalak staged the whole thing, possibly to protect the mineral claim in the area, by frightening off his competitors. He was a prospector with an active permit. The landing site was a location he had reason to want to keep private. The problems with this are considerable. Hoaxing the physical evidence alone would have required him to source radioactive material, contaminate a rock face and his own clothing, create the pattern of burns on his own body, and then maintain a perfectly consistent account through years of interrogation by multiple federal agencies. Then there are the medical effects, the weight loss, the immune suppression, the blackout spells. Those are not things you fake without a very specific and dangerous plan. And there was no financial gain, no book deal, no speaking circuit, no mineral claim that was successfully defended. He suffered financially and socially, not the reverse. His son is right. To have pulled that off, he would have been a genius operating on a scale that makes the UFO explanation look simple. The theory that most of the official investigators quietly circled back to, even when they didn't say it plainly, is the experimental aircraft explanation. Michalak himself held this view for a long time. His whole first interaction with the craft was built on that assumption. The description he gave, a disk with a hot exhaust system, a whirling motor, hissing air, and voices inside sound more like a prototype vehicle than an interstellar one. Canadian aviation history has a relevant footnote here. The Avro car, a saucer-shaped VTOL aircraft developed by Avro Canada under a contract with the U.S. military, was tested in the late 1950s and early 1960s. It was ultimately a failed design, never got more than a few feet off the ground, and was officially canceled. But officially canceled and actually canceled are not always the same thing in the Cold War era. The grid vent, the hot exhaust, the fact that the craft used what sounds like a gas-powered propulsion system rather than anything exotic, those details are at least as consistent with terrestrial engineering as with anything else. The problem is that no government has ever acknowledged an aircraft matching that description, and the RCAF specifically investigated the possibility and came up with nothing. If it was American, someone in the American system knew about it. If they knew, they didn't share. Now the radioactivity. That is the detail that keeps the terrestrial aircraft theory from getting too comfortable. The landing site showed radium-226 contamination. The silver bars were radioactive. Chemists proposed a commercially available radium-based luminescent paint, the kind used on watch dials and instrument gauges, could have been the source. Investigators found that some soil samples from the site responded to UV light, which is consistent with luminescent paint. However, samples from Michalak's home did not respond the same way, complicating the idea that he had carried the material out there himself. What the radioactive evidence may point to is something in between: a terrestrial aircraft using radioactive materials as part of its design, or shielding, operated by a government that had a very good reason not to admit it existed. That possibility sits uncomfortably in the middle, neither mundane nor extraordinary. Then there's the question of the 1968 burns. And this is where I find myself genuinely uncertain, in a way that I think is worth saying out loud. The original burns in May 1967, the irregular blotchy lesions his physician documented, are consistent with a thermal injury from a hot gas blast. They are messy, as thermal injuries are. But by January 1968, photographs showed something different. A regular, evenly spaced grid, precise enough that a Mayo Clinic psychiatrist suggested they were factitial, which is clinical language for self-inflicted. If he was producing those himself in 1968, that says something. It does not necessarily mean 1967 was a hoax. People who experience genuine trauma sometimes develop complicated relationships with that trauma. But it is a complicating detail, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. The version that keeps the most evidence inside its borders is the one that almost nobody in an official capacity wants to say plainly: that Stefan Michalak had a genuine encounter with something on that rock, something with a physical exhaust system and a radioactive signature, and that something was built by people who are still not talking. Whether those people worked for a government on this planet or somewhere else, as of today, is an open question. And then there's the version I keep coming back to, the one that probably gets me in trouble with the more skeptically minded folks in the audience. What if it was exactly what it looked like? A craft that landed, that was operated from inside by something that used voices, that burned a man with its exhaust and left radioactive traces in the rock, and that nobody in any government has ever convincingly accounted for, because they generally did not build it. The physical evidence at Falcon Lake is not rumor. It's not a single witness with nothing to show. Burnt clothing, radioactive soil, a medical record of psychological effects that do not resolve on any simple explanation, melted silver bars in a rock fissure, a cleared semicircle of granite that military investigators described as unexplainable. In 2019, the Michaelak family donated the investigative files, artifacts, and that burnt clothing to the University of Manitoba archives, where they sit today. In 2018, the Royal Canadian Mint issued a $20 glow-in-the-dark silver coin depicting the incident. That is a national government putting a UFO encounter on legal tender. Make of that what you will. If this was nothing, somebody forgot to tell Canada. I keep coming back to that image of him standing at the tree line, sketchpad in hand, watching something that his entire trained instinct is telling him is man-made. A military intelligence veteran defaulting to the most rational available explanation, trying English, then 5 more languages, trying to help the people inside. He walked towards it because he wasn't afraid of it. That's the part that stays with me. Whatever was on that rock, Stefan Michaelak walked toward it. Before I go, I want to mention something from a friend of mine. Scott Weimer, who some of you know from Turlock Unburied, has launched a new show called The Ghost Collector. The premise is exactly what it sounds like. For years, people have been sharing their strange experiences with Scott. Ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, unexplained encounters. Those glitches in reality that you never quite find the right words for. The story is to stay with a person. Scott is collecting them, preserving them, and finally giving them a place to live. Some of what he's gathered is unsettling. Some of it is flat out impossible. All of it is worth your time. You can find the show and submit your own story at theghostcollector.com. Still Unexplained is created and hosted by me, Mark Evanoff. You can find the show and episode previews at www.stillunexplained.com. Please follow wherever you listen, leave a rating or review, and share it with someone who'd appreciate it. I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.